He hunted lions in the desert, bare-handed, no armor, no fear, just a man, a blade, and the kind of courage that makes legends whisper his name centuries later. But the only roar that ever shook the earth didn't come from the beasts he killed. It came from his own chest. His name was Hamza ibn Abdul-Muttalib, the shield of Makkah, the blade of honor, the uncle of the messenger of Allah, a man so fierce that armies would retreat at the mention of his shadow, a man so loyal that he would walk into hell itself if it meant protecting his family, a man so strong that it took the truth to bring him to his knees. Because even the strongest warriors must face the battle within, and Hamza's battle wasn't against Rome. It wasn't against Persia. It wasn't against the lions he strangled in the dunes. It was against himself, against pride, against tradition, against the voice in his head that said, "You are Hamza, you bow to no one." But here's the question that will haunt this entire story. How does a man who feared nothing come to kneel before his Lord in tears? How does a hunter become the hunted? How does a warrior become a worshipper? The answer begins in the desert, before the swords, before the blood, before the day he became the Lion of Allah. Close your eyes and picture it. The Arabian Peninsula, a sea of sand that stretches beyond sight, beyond hope, beyond mercy. The sun doesn't warm you here, it punishes you. The wind doesn't cool you, it suffocates you. This is a land that only the strong survive. And Hamza was built for it. Tall, broad-shouldered, a body carved from stone and scarred from every hunt, every fight, every moment he chose danger over safety. He was the kind of man who made other men feel small just by existing. The kind of man poets wrote about, the kind of man mothers warned their daughters not to fall for, and they fell anyway. He was Quraysh royalty, blood of Abdul-Muttalib, brother to Abdullah, the father of Muhammad, uncle to the boy who would grow up to change the world. But back then, Muhammad was just his nephew, a quiet, thoughtful young man who spent too much time in caves and not enough time enjoying the privileges of their lineage. Hamza loved him, but he didn't understand him. Not yet. Hamza's reputation wasn't built in the marketplace. It was built in the wild. He would disappear for days, sometimes weeks, into the mountains, tracking prey that other men wouldn't dare approach: wolves, hyenas, lions. There's a story the elders still tell. A lion had been terrorizing a village on the outskirts of Makkah. It had killed livestock, mauled a shepherd, and every night its roar echoed through the valley like a promise of death. The village begged Quraysh for help, and Hamza volunteered, alone. He tracked the lion to its den, a cave half buried in rock, stinking of rot and bone, and he walked in. No torch, no backup, just a spear and the kind of insane confidence that separates legends from corpses. The lion charged. Hamza sidestepped, grabbed it by the mane, and drove his blade through its heart. When he returned to Makkah, dragging the carcass behind him, the people didn't cheer. They stepped back, because Hamza wasn't just brave, he was terrifying. The kind of man you wanted on your side, the kind of man you never wanted as your enemy. And for years, that's exactly what he. It was Makkah's sword, Quraysh's pride, a warrior without equal, but all of that was about to change. Because while Hamza was hunting lions in the desert, a revolution was rising in the city. Muhammad had begun his mission, quietly at first, secretly, gathering a handful of believers in the shadows, slaves, women, the forgotten, the broken, people Quraysh didn't care about, People Hamza didn't notice, but the message was spreading. There is no God but Allah. The idols you worship are powerless. The wealth you hoard will not save you. There is a day of judgment coming, and every soul will stand alone before their Creator. To the believers, it was liberation. To Quraysh, it was treason, and they responded the only way they knew how: violence. They beat the followers of Muhammad in the streets. They dragged Bilal into the desert, placed a boulder on his chest, and left him to bake under the sun. They tortured Yasir and Sumayya until their bodies gave out. They boycotted, exiled, starved, and humiliated anyone who dared say, La ilaha illallah. And Muhammad, he endured it, with patience, with silence, with a strength that had nothing to do with muscle and everything to do with certainty. But Hamza didn't know any of this. He was too busy hunting, too busy drinking, too busy living the life of a man who had everything and thought he needed nothing else. Until one day, someone insulted his nephew, and everything shattered. It was a normal afternoon. Hamza was returning from a hunt, his bow slung over his shoulder, his mind on wine and rest. As he passed through the marketplace, a woman, a servant, approached him. She was trembling. Hamza, you need to know what happened. He stopped. What? It's your nephew, Muhammad. Abu Jahl insulted him, publicly, at the Kaaba. He cursed him, mocked him, threw dust on his head. And Muhammad, he said nothing. He just walked away. The words hit Hamza like a blade to the chest, not because he cared about Muhammad's religion, but because honor was everything. And Abu Jahl had disrespected his family, his blood, his nephew. Hamza didn't think, he didn't plan, he just moved. He stormed toward the Kaaba, his jaw clenched, his fists shaking, the kind of rage that makes men do irreversible things. And there, in the courtyard, surrounded by Quraysh's elite, sat Abu Jahl, smug, comfortable, untouchable. Until Hamza's shadow fell over him, Abu Jahl looked up, and before he could speak, Hamza struck him, not with a fist, with his bow, across the face. Blood sprayed. The crowd gasped, and Hamza's voice, deep and thunderous, echoed through the courtyard. You insult my nephew, and you think there will be no consequence. Abu Jahl scrambled back, his hand on his bleeding face, his pride shattered. Hamza, have you lost your mind? Your nephew has abandoned the religion of your fathers. And Hamza, standing tall, said the words that would change his life forever. I am of his religion. I testify that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. Silence. Total, suffocating silence. The nobles of Quraysh stared at him like he had just declared war on the world, and in a way he had. But here's the thing. Hamza didn't say it because he believed. He said it out of rage, out of pride, out of loyalty to blood, not to truth. And that night, when the adrenaline faded and the silence of his home pressed in on him, Hamza sat alone. And for the first time in his life, he was afraid. That night, the lion did not hunt. He sat in the darkness of his room, staring at the floor, his hands still shaking, not from anger, from doubt. What have I done? I don't even know what I believe. I don't know this religion. I don't know this God. What if I just destroyed my life for nothing? And so, for the first time, since childhood, Hamza did something he had never done before. He prayed, not with eloquence, not with certainty, but with desperation, trembling, raw, broken. If you are real, if this is the truth, then show me, because I can't go back. and I don't know how to go forward." He knelt there, a warrior reduced to a beggar, waiting for an answer he wasn't sure would come. And when the dawn broke over Makkah, painting the sky in gold and fire, so did the answer. Dawn broke over Makkah like a whisper from the heavens. Golden light spilled across the Kaaba, painting the stones in warmth that hadn't been there the night before. And Hamza, still on his knees, still trembling from a night of desperate prayer, felt it. Not a voice, not a vision, just peace. A silence so profound it drowned out every doubt, every fear, every question that had clawed at his chest in the darkness. For the first time in his life, the chaos in his mind stopped. No more wondering if he was strong enough. No more proving himself to men who would never be satisfied. No more chasing honor in the eyes of people who measured worth by wealth and lineage. For the first time, he feared only Allah. And that fear didn't break him, it freed him. He stood slowly, his legs unsteady, his face wet with tears he didn't remember shedding, and he walked out into the light. Not as the hunter, not as the warrior, not as Hamza ibn Abdul-Muttalib, pride of Quraysh, but as Hamza ibn Abdul-Muttalib, servant of Allah. And he would never be the same. Word spread through Makkah like wildfire. Hamza has accepted Islam. The strongest warrior in the city. The man Quraysh relied on for protection. The man whose very presence made enemies reconsider their plans. He was now one of them, one of the believers. And overnight, everything changed. The persecution didn't stop, but it slowed. Because now when Abu Jahl raised his hand to strike a Muslim in the street, he had to think twice. What if Hamza hears about this? When the mobs gathered to beat Bilal, they hesitated. What if Hamza shows up? The believers who had spent years cowering in corners, hiding their prayers, whispering their testimonies in the dark, now they had a shield, and Hamza wore that title like armor. He stood beside the Prophet during prayer. He walked with him through the marketplace, daring anyone to say a word. He became the living proof that strength and faith were not opposites. They were meant to walk together. But this wasn't the old Hamza. This wasn't the man who fought for pride and glory. This was a man who had discovered something worth dying for. Truth, justice, Allah. And the believers saw it in his eyes. The way he lowered his gaze when the Quran was recited. The way his hands trembled when he made dua. The way he wept during tahajjud, alone in the night, a warrior brought to his knees by the mercy of his creator. One of the companions later said, "We feared Hamza before Islam, but after Islam we loved him, because we saw that his strength was no longer for himself. It was for all of us." 2 years after his conversion, the test came. Not in the streets of Makkah, not in the marketplace, but on a battlefield 80 miles away, in a valley called Badr. The Muslims were outnumbered 3-1. 313 believers, farmers, merchants, former slaves, against 1,000 Tanzavi, Quraysh's finest warriors, the best armor, the best weapons, the best horses. And leading them was every man who had tortured, exiled, and mocked the Muslims for years. This wasn't just a battle. It was a reckoning. The night before the fight, Hamza walked among the believers. They were terrified. Some of them had never held a sword. Some of them were barely old enough to grow beards. And here they were, about to face the most powerful army in Arabia. But Hamza didn't give them a rousing speech. He didn't pump them up with false bravado. He just knelt beside them and said, "Tomorrow we don't fight for ourselves. We fight for the one who created us. And if we die as martyrs. There is no loss in that." And then he smiled, a quiet, certain smile, and walked away. When dawn came, so did the storm. A sandstorm rolled across the desert, thick and blinding, turning the sky into a wall of amber dust. The two armies stood on opposite sides of the valley, invisible to each other, waiting for the wind to settle. And in that silence, the Muslims prayed, whispered du'as, hands raised to the sky, tears mixing with the sand on their faces. The Prophet stood at the front, his voice barely audible over the wind. "O Allah, if this group is destroyed today, you will not be worshipped on earth." And then the wind stopped. The dust fell, and across the valley Quraysh's army came into view, rows of soldiers, glinting armor, banners, snapping in the breeze. The believers gripped their swords, and Hamza, standing at the front, a white ostrich feather tied to his chest as his mark, roared. Not a word, not a command, just a sound. A primal, guttural battle cry that shook the earth and sent a chill down the spine of every man on that field. And then he charged, alone, straight into the heart of the enemy, and the Muslims, seeing their lion run, followed. The battle was chaos, dust, blood, steel ringing against steel. Men screaming, horses collapsing, the smell of sweat and iron and death. But in the middle of it all, Hamza was unstoppable. He moved like a force of nature. Every swing of his sword was precise, devastating, final. Men twice his size fell before him. Veterans of 100 battles couldn't withstand a single strike. And when it was over, when the dust settled and Quraysh's army fled in humiliation, 70 of their best were dead. And Hamza stood in the center of the field, blood-stained, exhausted, victorious, but not celebrating, praying, thanking Allah for the victory, for the mercy, for allowing him to live long enough to see this day. After the battle, the Muslims took prisoners. Among them were men who had tortured them, men who had killed their families, men who had laughed while Bilal screamed under the sun. The believers wanted revenge. It would have been justified. But the Prophet commanded mercy. Treat them well. Feed them. Do not humiliate them. And Hamza, who had every reason to hate these men, obeyed without question. He personally ensured the prisoners were given water. He shared his own food with them. And when one of them, a man who had once mocked him in the streets of Makkah, looked up at him with fear in his eyes and said, "You were supposed to kill me," Hamza replied, "I was, but Allah taught me something better." That moment defined him. Not the roar, not the sword, not the kill count, but the mercy. Because true strength isn't in how hard you can strike, it's in knowing when to not to. But mercy has enemies, and vengeance doesn't forget. In Makkah, a woman sat in the shadows of her home, her hands clenched, her heart black with rage. Her name was Hind bint Utbah, wife of Abu Sufyan, daughter of one of Quraysh's fallen leaders. And at Badr, she had lost everything. Her father, killed. Her brother, killed. Her uncle, killed. All by the hands of the Muslims. And when she asked who had led the charge, who had struck down her family, who had become the symbol of their defeat, the answer was always the same: Hamza. She didn't weep. She didn't mourn in public. She plotted. She called for Washi, an Ethiopian slave known across Arabia for one thing, his spear. He never missed, not once, not ever. Hind stood before him, her voice low and venomous. "Kill Hamza. Bring me his heart, and I will grant you your freedom." Washi looked at her, then at the spear in his hand, and he nodded. The deal was made. Hamza stood on the walls of Medina, looking out at the horizon. He had won battles. He had defended the weak. He had become the shield of Islam, the lion of Allah, the man believers looked to when hope seemed impossible. But he didn't know. In the shadow of his victories, another hunter was already aiming for his heart. And this time, the prey wouldn't see it coming. The wind carried dust across the plains of Medina, not the gentle kind that dances in the sunlight, but the heavy kind, thick with heat, with tension, with the weight of what was coming. War. 1 year had passed since Badr. 1 year since Quraysh had been humiliated on the battlefield, their pride shattered, their dead left in the sand. And they had not forgotten. They had regrouped, rearmed, rebuilt, and now they were marching toward Medina with 3,000 warriors, the largest army Arabia had ever seen. Against them stood 700 Muslims, farmers, merchants, freed slaves, and one lion. The believers gathered at the edge of the city, armor glinting in the sun, swords strapped to their sides, hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and faith. But Hamza was calm. He walked beside the Prophet, his white ostrich feather tied to his chest, his face serene, his steps measured. Someone asked him, "Are you not afraid?" And Hamza smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, and said, "Why would I? Fear. If I live for Allah. If I die as a shaheed. Either way, I win." He had no fear of death, because he had already died once, the night he knelt in his room, broken and desperate, and was reborn in the light of Islam. This was just his body catching up to his soul. The drums of war echoed in the distance. The Muslims moved forward, and the mountain of Uhud loomed ahead, silent and watching, as if it knew what was about to unfold on its slopes. The clash was immediate, no hesitation, no negotiation, just steel meeting steel, and the roar of men colliding like waves against rock. Arrows filled the sky, blotting out the sun for seconds at a time before crashing down into shields, into sand, into flesh. The air smelled of sweat and iron. The ground shook beneath the weight of charging horses, and in the center of it all, Hamza. He fought like a storm given human form. Every swing of his sword was a prayer. Every strike was an act of worship. He didn't fight with rage. He fought with certainty. Allahu Akbar. His voice cut through the chaos, louder than the screams, louder than the clash of blades, and the believers, hearing him, seeing him, found courage they didn't know they had. He carved through Quraysh's ranks like they were nothing. Veterans fell. Champions retreated. Even the bravest among them hesitated when they saw the white feather coming toward them. Because Hamza wasn't just a warrior. He was a force of nature. He was the wrath of truth made flesh. And for a moment, just a moment, it looked like Badr all over again. The Muslims were winning. Quraysh was breaking. Victory was within reach. But wars are not won by strength alone. They are won by strategy, by discipline, by obedience. And when the archers on the hill, against the Prophet's command, abandoned their posts to collect the spoils of war, everything changed. On the edge of the battlefield, hidden behind a ridge of rock, a man knelt in silence. His name was Washi, Ethiopian, slave, spear thrower. He had no loyalty to Quraysh. He had no hatred for the Muslims. He was here for one reason, and one reason only: freedom. Hind's promise echoed in his mind like a drumbeat. "Kill Hamza, bring me his heart, and you will be free." He had been watching Hamza all day, tracking him, waiting, studying his movements, his patterns, the way he turned, the way he breathed. Washi was a hunter, and Hamza, lion of Allah, shield of the believers, warrior of God, was the prey. He gripped his spear, an Abyssinian javelin, perfectly balanced, razor-sharp, designed to kill from a distance. He had thrown this spear 1,000 times. He had never missed, not once, not ever. His heart pounded in his chest, not from fear, from anticipation. One throw, one life, one chance at freedom. He took a breath, closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, Hamza was in range. Time slowed. The battlefield seemed to blur at the edges, the noise fading into a dull hum. Washi rose from his hiding place, his arm pulling back, the spear glinting in the sunlight. Hamza was mid-swing, his sword cutting down another enemy, his voice still calling out, "Allahu Akbar!" He didn't see it coming. Didn't hear the whistle of the javelin slicing through the air, didn't feel it, until it was already too late. The spear pierced through his abdomen, just below the ribs, and erupted out the other side. Silence. Not in the battlefield. The battle still raged, men still screamed, swords still clashed. But for Hamza, everything stopped. He staggered, looked down, saw the spear lodged in his body, blood pouring from the wound, staining the white feather on his chest, and for the first time since he had accepted Islam, he fell, not forward, not in retreat, but to his knees. His sword slipped from his hand, his breath came in shallow gasps, and, as the light began to fade from his eyes, he whispered, barely audible, barely there, "La ilaha illallah." There is no God but Allah. His final words, his final testimony, his final act of worship. And then the Lion of Allah was silent. His body crumpled to the earth, the dust rising around him like a shroud. The believers nearby saw it happen. They screamed. They ran toward him. But it was too late. Hamza ibn Abdul-Muttalib, the bravest of the brave, the strongest of the strong, had fallen, and his roar, though silenced on earth, still echoed through the heavens. When the battle ended and the dust settled, Hind came. She didn't wait, didn't hesitate. She walked across the battlefield, past the wounded, past the dying, until she found him, Hamza, lying still, the man who had killed her father, her brother, her pride, and she stood over him, her face twisted with something darker than hatred, satisfaction. What she did next cannot be described in detail, not because it's too graphic for words, but because it dishonors the fallen to dwell on it. She desecrated his body. She took from him what she had promised Washi. She mutilated the man who had shown mercy to her people after Badr. And when she was done, she walked away, smiling, as if she had won, as if revenge had healed the wound in her heart. But it hadn't. It never does. When the Prophet Muhammad walked through the battlefield, searching for the wounded, counting the dead, he found him, Hamza, his uncle, his protector, his lion. The Prophet knelt beside him, his hands trembling, his breath caught in his throat. And for the first time in his life as a prophet, he wept, not silently, not with restraint, but with a grief so deep, so raw, so human, that the companions who saw it would carry the memory for the rest of their lives. He placed his hand on Hamza's chest and said, voice breaking, "You lived as the best of us, and you died as the best of us." He ordered that Hamza be buried with honor, that his body be wrapped with care, that his name be remembered forever. And as they lowered him into the earth, the Prophet looked up at the sky and said, "Jibril has informed me that Hamza ibn Abdul-Muttalib is written in the heavens as Asadullah, the Lion of Allah. Not the Lion of Quraysh, not the Lion of Makkah, the Lion of Allah, a title that would outlive empires. a legacy that would echo through centuries, a man who walked into fire, faced lions, fought armies, and in the end gave everything for a truth he discovered on his knees. But here's the question that haunts the story. What happened to Washi? The man who threw the spear, the man who killed the lion of Allah, the man who traded a life for his freedom. Did he live in peace? Did he die in glory? Did he carry the weight of that moment for the rest of his days? And when Islam spread across the world, when the Muslims became the victors, when Washi stood face to face with the very religion he had tried to destroy, could mercy exist, even for the man who threw the spear? Years passed. Empires rose and fell. Islam spread across the Arabian Peninsula like dawn breaking over darkness. Makkah surrendered. The Kaaba was cleansed of idols. The Prophet stood victorious in the very city that had exiled him. And Washi was still running. Not from armies, not from enemies, but from himself. He was free. Hind had kept her promise. His chains were gone. His slavery was over. But freedom, he learned, is not the absence of chains. It's the absence of guilt. And Washi had none. Every night when he closed his eyes, he saw the same thing. Hamza, falling to his knees, blood staining the white feather on his chest, his lips forming the words, La ilaha illallah. Washi would wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding like it was trying to escape his chest. He tried to drown the memory in wine, in women, in distance. He traveled through deserts, across mountains, into cities where no one knew his name, but everywhere he went, the ghost of Hamza followed. Because you can run from people, you can run from places, but you can never run from what you've done. And Washi was tired of running. One day, in a marketplace far from Medina, Washi overheard a conversation. Two merchants discussing the spread of Islam. One of them said, They say the Prophet forgives anyone who comes to him in truth, even the worst of sinners, even those who fought against him. The other laughed. That's madness. No man forgives like that. But Washi stopped walking. His hand gripped the edge of a stall to steady himself. Forgiveness, even for the worst of sinners. The words echoed in his mind like a lifeline thrown into a drowning sea, and for the first time in years, he felt hope. Not certainty, not peace, just hope. A fragile, trembling thing, but it was enough. He sold everything he had. He turned toward Medina, and he began to walk. Medina was different than he remembered, no longer a city at war, but a city at peace. Children played in the streets, markets bustled with trade. The call to prayer echoed 5 times a day, and people stopped, whatever they were doing, and bowed. Washi walked through it all like a ghost. No one recognized him. No one knew. But he knew, and that was enough to make his legs shake with every step. He asked where the Prophet was. Someone pointed to the mosque, and Washi stood at the entrance, staring at the doorway, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might break his ribs. What if he kills me? What if he has me arrested? What if there's no mercy left for someone like me? But he had come too far to turn back. So he stepped inside, and there, sitting among his companions, teaching, speaking with a voice so calm it seemed to quiet the entire world, was Muhammad. Washi's throat tightened, his vision blurred, and before he knew what he was doing, he was walking forward, past the rows of seated believers, until he stood directly in front of the Prophet. The room fell silent. The Prophet looked up, and their eyes met. The Prophet studied him for a long moment, not with anger, not with hatred, just recognition. And then quietly he asked, "Are you Washi?" Washi's voice cracked. Yes, O messenger of Allah. The silence that followed felt eternal. The companions held their breath. Some of them knew the name. Some of them remembered Uhud. Some of them wanted to draw their swords right there. But the Prophet raised his hand, a gentle gesture, and they stilled. He looked at Washi and asked, his voice soft but direct, "Was it you who killed my uncle?" Washi wanted to lie, wanted to run, wanted to disappear into the earth. But he had come here for truth, and truth demanded honesty. So he answered, tears streaming down his face. Yes, it was me. The room seemed to hold its breath. The Prophet closed his eyes, his jaw tightened. For a moment Washi was certain this was the end. But then the Prophet opened his eyes, and his voice, though heavy with sorrow, carried something else. "Mercy," he said, "can you not let me see your face? It pains me to look at you. Not a command to leave, not a sentence of death, just honesty. A wound too deep to ignore, but not deep enough to close the door." And then the Prophet added, "Go, for Islam erases what came before it. If you have truly repented, then Allah has forgiven you. And if Allah has forgiven you, who am I to condemn you?" Washi collapsed, not from relief, from the weight of it. Mercy he didn't deserve. Forgiveness he hadn't earned. Grace so profound it shattered every defense he had built around his heart. He wept, ugly, broken sobs, and the companions watched in silence as a man who had killed their hero was granted mercy by their Prophet. Because that's what Islam does. It doesn't erase the past. It transforms the future. Washi left that room a different man. Not free from guilt, that would take time, but free from despair. He accepted Islam, he prayed, he fasted, he lived quietly, humbly, trying to rebuild a life he had broken with his own hands. And then, years later, came the day of his redemption. A false prophet rose in Arabia, Musaylima the liar, claiming to be a messenger of God, leading thousands astray, threatening the unity of Islam. And in the battle against him, Washi stood on the front lines, not as a slave, not as a murderer, but as a soldier of Allah. And when Musaylima charged forward, arrogant and defiant, Washi pulled back his arm. The same arm that had once thrown a spear at the Lion of Allah, and this time he threw it for the truth. The accursed spear flew, straight, true, unstoppable, and it struck Musaylima through the chest, killing him instantly. The battlefield erupted in cheers, but Washi didn't celebrate. He knelt in the sand, tears streaming down his face, and whispered, "The spear that took a life has now defended the truth. Perhaps Allah has forgiven me." And the companions who saw it said, "The man who killed the best of us also killed the worst of them." Subhanallah. This is the story of Hamza, but it's also the story of Washi, because Hamza's legacy wasn't just in how he lived. It was in how his death brought another soul to Islam. The lion fell on earth, but his roar still echoes in Jannah, where he stands among the martyrs, crowned in honor, waiting for the day of judgment. And Washi, he spent the rest of his life in worship, in service, in quiet repentance. He never stopped missing the man he killed. But he also never stopped thanking Allah for the mercy he didn't deserve, because that's the miracle of Islam. No sin is too great. No past is too dark. No soul is too broken. If you turn to Allah with a sincere heart, He will turn to you with open arms. Hamza taught us what it means to be strong. Washi taught us what it means to be forgiven, and together their stories remind us. Strength is not in how many battles you win. It's not in how loud you roar. It's not in how fearless you appear. Strength is in how deeply you bow before your Lord. Strength is in admitting when you're wrong. Strength is in seeking forgiveness when you've fallen. Strength is in rising again, not because you're unbroken, but because you trust the one who can heal you. Hamza ibn Abdul-Muttalib, the man who hunted lions, the man who challenged tyrants, the man who stood beside the Prophet when the world stood against him, the man who died with a La ilaha illallah on his lips. He was the Lion of Allah, not because he never fell, but because every time he rose for truth, and his legacy doesn't live in the battles he won. It lives in the hearts he inspired, in the courage he gave to the weak, in the mercy he showed to the broken, in the faith he carried until his final breath. So when you feel too weak to stand, remember Hamza. When you feel too broken to be forgiven, remember Washi. When you feel like your past defines you, remember that Islam erases what came before it. And when you wonder if your life matters, remember that even a single roar for truth can echo through eternity. This was Hamza, the Lion of Allah, and his story is still roaring. Do not think of those who have been killed in the cause of Allah as dead. Rather, they are alive with their Lord, receiving provision.